Marriage engagement photographers, videographers of Reddit. Have you developed a sixth sense for which marriages will flourish and which will not? What are the green and red flags? At my parents' wedding, the photographer said to my grandmother, "I've seen a lot of couples and I know which ones will stay together. These two, they're gonna stay together." Then 3 years later that photographer killed his wife. Technically doesn't invalidate his opinion. Red flag, when the groom gets a thoughtful look at the till death do us part section of the vows. Photographer here. I swear that all of the couples that have split up have smashed the cake in their SOS face. None of the nice cake couples have. Just my weird anecdotal experience. Maybe it's a sign of respect for each other. You're the second person I've heard say this. If it's not okay with both people, it totally makes sense. I feel like I would wanna do that, but plan it ahead of time. Okay, what is this cake smashing? I've seen this mentioned in this thread many times, but I've never seen anything like that on any wedding I've been to. Is this some weird American tradition that I don't know? There is one particular venue that has a 100% divorce rate with our clients. It's a state park, which I've dubbed Oman Meadows. Please, it's killing me. What's the official name of Oman Meadows? Fascinating. Maybe I should stay clear of the outdoorsy types after all. Please tell us more about the horrors of Oman Meadows. Former wedding videographer. When doing the letter read the bride at the end said, which I quote, "Well, that was fucking stupid. I cut that part out in the final video." Edit. Let me clarify what I am referring to. The couple reads their letter from their partner prior to the wedding. She just got done reading the groom's letter and was talking about what he wrote. To be fair, what he wrote was not exactly Shakespeare, but still a harsh response. She said it at the end of the groom's letter? What's a letter read? To be fair, what he wrote was not exactly Shakespeare. Can you elaborate on this? Was it really cringy bad? Like, "You make good sandwiches and I like your butt"? Or was it just not articulate and romantic enough for her liking? Because I've definitely seen some cringy ass vows that made me uncomfortable as a guest. The worst one was when you told me you put your partner's pleasure and happiness before your own. I knew you were the one. Everyone cringes. Bride is mortified. Red flag, the groom winking at both my assistant and I during the ceremony. He was not winking in the sense that he might have been tearing up or had something in his eye, but there was a part in the ceremony where the couple sat down and he would lean his head back in his chair, look past his soon-to-be wife and wink at me, or look over his left shoulder and wink at my assistant. It was bizarre. That's just Morse code for "I'm a douchebag." Not a wedding photographer, but my parents' wedding video is a tell-all story. At the cake cutting, my mom had specifically asked my dad not to put cake on her face, which is usually a tradition. Dad did it anyway. Mom smacked him across the face. Dad said fuck this and stormed out of the reception. They had a 20-year rocky marriage of lies and infidelity, and are finally officially divorced. They are much better off now. The cake cutting really seems to be a good rule of thumb for a relationship. I'm genuinely surprised at the number of times face caking has been called a harbinger of divorce in this comment section. To be fair, I never did enjoy seeing it happen unless the couple had agreed to it beforehand and were having fun. It always seemed like an out of the blue dick move that ruined the victim's mood, and often their clothes and makeup. Someone face caked me once on my birthday. I slapped them that second. I got grounded, but it was worth it. Not a photographer, but I make a lot of engagement rings. It's actually really simple. If they're nice to each other, and nice to me and my staff, they're going to do well. If they're short-tempered, rude, pushy, etc., it's a sign they don't really want to be there. When my husband and I were ring shopping, a worker who wasn't working specifically with us heard us asking about inscriptions. She said, "I give them 5 years, maximum." The guy working with us was shocked. I felt so bad for him. I also couldn't believe a jewelry place would hire this woman. We are coming up on 5 years this year. But things are going really well, so she can suck it. Haha. Or they're just assholes. It's not easy being married to a 24/7 asshole. I used to help a buddy of mine do wedding videos back in college. I found the bigger the country hit they use for the wedding song, the shorter the marriage. Obscure songs seem to last longer. This is why I only played Weird Al deep cuts. We're destined to be married until death do we part. I can totally see this. People who can't pick a song to dance to that speaks to their relationship other than whatever top 40 romance song is currently popular, or by choosing some overdone number. I don't know, it just seems like their relationship has no real depth. Not a photographer, but I'm a minister with a 100% divorce rate. I think the biggest red flag is me performing your marriage ceremony. UHH, is this like a 1/1 or 2/2? Or are we talking 4? 953/4, 953? Edit, is your ministry obscure and vaguely culty? Not in an asshole way, but in an us against the world, marry one of us way? It was the first wedding I ever photographed. I asked how he proposed and apparently he didn't. The bride came home one day and was like, "We're getting married," and he was like, alright. The bride also ran down the aisle to Beyonce's Halo. It was a sight. I believe they got a divorce a few years later. Thank you for that hilarious visual of a bride aggressively sprinting down the aisle to Beyonce's Halo. Party bus driver for almost 5 years. Often we would do the bachelorette and the wedding party. All too often we'd get a combined bachelorette party. And those were the worst. 90% of the time it was the super controlling bride who didn't want the groom out on his own with his boys. When I was the office manager, I really tried to discourage this, as it seldom ended well. There would almost always be fighting and drama. We had a handful of ladies that we'd done 2 wedding buses for. Men, if your lady won't let you have a bachelor party but wants a bachelorette party, that's an enormous red flag. I have a feeling that a combined bachelorette party is either a really good sign for the marriage, or a really bad sign for the marriage. And usually it'd be the really bad sign. I used to be a photojournalist and shot the occasional wedding either as a wedding present to friends or for extra cash to buy more gear. None of my, very few, clients are divorced, somehow. But I did try to pick up some work hanging out in front of Toronto City Hall the week after gay marriage was legalized in Canada. Just as my friend and I walked up, a couple came out in full 70s tuxedo and puffy wedding dress, yelling at each other while the groom tried desperately to get his ring off. A very angry looking older couple followed them out pushing a baby stroller and muttering something in a foreign language. Joe and I figured they might last a week, at best. I feel like there could be a lot of euphemisms in this comment. Obligatory, not any of the above mentioned posts, but with some experience, at the reception. My own wedding reception. My husband spent the entire time with his female best friend and even did all the slow dances with her. She called me a bitch when I mentioned it might be a bit inappropriate. He did not stand up for me. So glad that I am no longer with him. My sister's wedding. They were completely toxic for each other. Of course everyone thought they were just the perfect couple and they had this huge wedding. I don't think they even crossed paths during the reception, other than to argue loudly in front of everyone before he left entirely. He didn't come back home for 2 weeks. I think they lasted a whole 2 months. My own wedding reception. My husband spent the entire time with his female best friend and even did all the slow dances with her. She called me a bitch when I mentioned it might be a bit inappropriate. He did not stand up for me. So glad that I am no longer with him. Geez, I'm glad you're not with him too. That first story took a lot of nerve from your ex's friend. Was there anything that clued you into them before the engagement wedding? 1 LOL WTF. That's not a red flag, that's a fucking tornado siren. Officiant here. $200 is still $200. Married a younger couple under a waterfall. Even with multiple felony convictions, face tattoos, unemployment, habitual drug use, anorexia, multiple miscarriages. For everything wrong. They never cheated. They stayed together. They never quit. They had good teamwork. And they had a great dynamic. Bible says judge not. We hiked in, got married, hiked out, went to Denny's. They didn't care about the little details. They didn't want a wedding. They just wanted to get married. That was 2008, and I believe they're still together. I didn't see it coming. When I shot a Mormon wedding and the groom was pretty flamboyant and flirty with his best man, I later saw them fondling each other's butts discreetly when they thought no one was looking. So, is that a green flag or a red flag? Musical notes. Turn it off, like a light switch. Musical notes. Oh, that's so sad. I asked my dad who did it for 35 years. He said this. Oh, a very interesting question. After 35 years of shooting weddings, yes, I've definitely photographed a few wedding couples that I knew were not going to stay married. There are some things that are interesting on the wedding day. How they treat each other, what is said to one another and how they act. But if they go into the marriage thinking that it's just gonna be a trial, it's not gonna last. Weddings are a great day, but what happens after that day is what's really important. To be successful in marriage takes a lot of work, a lot of forgiveness, a lot of patience, and a lot of love. Unconditional love. That's the real key. I was shooting a friend's wedding years ago and witnessed a pretty serious red flag. To close the vows part, they did a sand mixing metaphor thing where he had a vial of white sand and she a vial of black sand, and they were to pour them into a tall empty vial together to make grey sand, symbolizing their inseparable union. As they poured, they could not sync with each other at all. One would slow down, the other sped up, and vice versa. They ended up pouring near perfectly stratified black and white layers. He nervously giggled and she looked forlorn as the pastor and guests marveled at their zebra-striped creation. They lasted about 2 years. Is having layers not supposed to be the final result? I've seen a couple sand ceremonies and never once have the two colors blended together. Truly sad and amazing at the same time. I could see it being a fun little mishap if they're just nervous, clumsy, and if they're laughing about it. If one or both of them becomes pissed, that's a sign they'd go through a lot of grief over the smallest issues. Did some wedding pictures a few months back. Before the wedding, the groom asked me if my images are going to be on Facebook because he didn't want them online. I said it was going to be their pics and they can do what they want. Well, 2 weeks after the wedding, the bride contacted me and said then pics were beautiful, but she had left her new husband as he had a side chick. That's why he didn't want the pics online, because the side chick would find out. So weird this is on the front page on my engagement photoshoot day. I will make sure to wipe my fiance's forehead several times. I went to a wedding once where the groom spent the reception getting wasted with his college buddies. The bride was a bigger girl who overheated in her dress and had to leave the reception for a while to sit down, have it loosened, cool off, etc. All her bridesmaids and some of the closer female guests, me including, were fussing over her for at least half an hour. Her new husband was completely oblivious until her mother went to get him, and then he looked annoyed rather than solicitous. Needless to say, red flag. I used to edit wedding videos, which included the before and party afterwards. In one video, the groom seemed pissed off the whole time. Might have discovered something about her. I don't know. He looked disgusted. It was hard to edit because there were no cute moments. I'm pretty sure they didn't last. On a slightly unrelated note, I'm no scientist, but in the many weddings I worked, black people seem to have a lot more fun overall. Even controlling for income. I have done wedding and engagement photos. I personally love the couples who don't need much direction. Green flag is the couples who laugh and joke with each other. They act like kids and don't mind their flaws. One couple, hey, see how we both have huge noses? Can we balance our rings on them? Great shot even with the guy's extra nose hair. Red flags when one of them is super controlling and up the others at about everything.